I was never meant to feel fear. From the moment my egg cracked under the heat of the birthing coils, every pulse of Varkan teaching hammered one message into my growing mind. We are the ultimate product of evolution, the apex of biological perseverance, the first and only children of a world so hostile, so relentlessly murderous that even our myths feared to speak its name without offering a blood tithe. Every species across the galactic arm acknowledged us as Deathworlders, the sole inheritors of a world where life clawed itself forward with teeth bared and armor thickened. We were the standard by which endurance was measured. Nothing lived as we did, nothing survived as we did, nothing adapted as we did. Or so we believed. Threxos 4 was a minor moon in a minor system, not worthy of rumor, much less destiny. Yet destiny found us there, buried beneath the collapsing metal lattice towers of the mining facility we were assigned to inspect. The ground quaked with the fury of ruptured magma channels. Toxic dust rolled like thunderclouds across the shattered plains. Fire tore through fractured superstructures, vomiting plumes of crimson ash that would flay the lungs of most known species. But not ours, not the Varkan. Deathworlders fear no climate. Or so I believed, until the blaze parted. At first, I thought the shape was a hallucination created by the smoke. It was too tall, too thin, too exposed. No armor plates, no chitin, no protective membrane over the eyes. It walked on only 2 limbs, with the remaining pair hanging loosely at its sides, as if it had strolled into a hellstorm by mistake. The creature coughed once, a casual sound, almost annoyed. Then it muttered a short, sharp phrase in its harsh language and trudged onward through a rain of molten debris. I remember the emptiness in my lungs. My gills tightened, my claws trembled at the sight before me. The creature's exposed face should have been melting beneath the toxic soot. The gases alone should have liquefied its insides. Yet it continued forward with a gait that resembled defiance more than survival. Then I saw what it carried. 3 of my crewmates, warriors bred for brutality, were slung over its shoulders like sacks of grain. All of them unconscious, all of them alive. It wasn't possible. It wasn't logical. It wasn't natural. I had mocked the notion of the planet they came from, Earth, a myth among the lesser species, whispered by fringe traders and half-mad explorers. A world even more violent than ours? Impossible. No ecosystem could rival Varka. No fauna could match the lethality of our Aum. No sapient species could survive such extremes and remain civilized. Yet this being made the impossible look routine. As it stepped through a wall of collapsing metal, the flames illuminated its features. Charred synthetic cloth clinging to a battered frame. Skin blistered yet intact. Eyes bright with something wild, something alive, something ancient. Not the joy of survival, the thrill of challenge. And when those eyes met mine, something shifted inside me, something foundational, something I had believed immovable. The Varkan were not alone. We were not supreme. We were merely the first, not the finest. The creature deposited my wounded kin at my feet, then straightened with a grunt. It spoke again, its voice rough, strangely warm, and utterly unconcerned with the apocalypse unfolding around us. When I failed to respond, it gave a crooked smile, as if the danger was a trivial puzzle to be solved later. How could anything smile during a planetary meltdown? The ground convulsed beneath us. A seismic roar split the air. The mining towers, their bases already liquefying, began to fold like dying insects. Shockwaves rippled outward, hurling debris in every direction. My armor plates clamped instinctively. My remaining crew braced for impact. The creature, the human, as I would soon learn, did not brace. It simply turned its back to the destruction, shielding us with its strangely fragile body as though instinct demanded it protect those weaker than itself. A Deathworlder protects nothing. A Deathworlder endures alone. A Deathworlder survives by outlasting all competition. But this human defied every rule. When the shockwave ended, the human exhaled softly, almost disappointed the danger had passed so quickly. It took a step forward, scanning the ruins as though searching for its next trial. In that instant, I realized the most terrifying truth of my existence. Humans were not born on a death world. Humanity is the death world. A species that meets catastrophe not with fear, but with curiosity. A species that sees extinction-level threats as inconveniences. A species that walks through flame and ash not to prove dominance, but because moving forward is simply what they do. As the human gestured for us to follow, I felt a tremor of something I had never known in all my cycles of battle, bloodshed, and survival. Not fear, not awe, something deeper, something older. Recognition. The universe had lied to us. We were not the top of the chain. We were not the harshest children of evolution. We were merely the prologue to a far more terrifying chapter. And as the human led us into the collapsing facility without hesitation, seeking survivors, seeking threats, seeking purpose, I understood why entire empires feared the species even before meeting them. Humans do not challenge monsters. Humans challenge the concept of monsters. And somewhere deep within the smoke-filled corridors of Threxos 4, I realized with terrible clarity. The galaxy's apex predator had just stepped onto the stage, and it wasn't us. The ground split open with a scream of molten stone, and from below, something even the Varkin feared began to rise. The human's eyes narrowed, mine widened. The creature whispered. I once believed I understood danger. I once believed I understood fear. But that was before we brought a human aboard our vessel, before Commander Elias Rohn walked our corridors like an apex predator trying very hard to pretend he was harmless. It began the first cycle after Threxos 4, when the shock of our initial encounter had faded enough for my senses to clear. My gills no longer fluttered from the smoke, my claws no longer trembled. And so, with clarity returned, I made the worst possible decision a Varkin scientist could make. I observed the human. What I discovered did not just unsettle me, it unmade me. His physiology ignored boundaries that every species, even other Deathworlders, considered absolute. His bones showed density levels comparable to structural alloys used in our hulls, yet he moved with unsettling ease as though gravity owed him obedience. His blood, by all biochemical logic, should have ignited inside his veins. Its oxygen binding capacity was a volatile miracle, an evolutionary compromise that would have killed any other being. They were purposeful aberrations. Yet biology was only the beginning. The real horror was behavioral. The incident that became known aboard the ship as the breach event started with a small atmospheric leak in corridor G12, a minor problem, a routine repair. Two Varkin deckhands were approaching with sealing tools when the floor trembled and the breach expanded into a rupturing wound across the hull. And Rohn, who was not even scheduled to be near that section, ran toward it. Ran. Not away. Toward. By the time I reached the corridor, the atmosphere was venting in a screaming vortex of debris and steam. The temperatures were lethal without armor. The pressure drop alone should have torn soft-skinned species apart. Rohn was already inside. He held a molten alloy applicator, one designed to be used at range, never by hand, pressed directly against the breach. Liquid metal spilled across the crack, sizzling violently. Boiling air licked at his exposed wrist where his suit had torn. I watched his skin blister, peel, weep fluid. And he laughed. He shouted through the comms, voice muffled by static and possibly delirium. When we dragged him away from the sealed hull and laid him on a med slab, I could not stop staring. The smell of scorched flesh still clung to the air like an accusation. Yet Roan grinned at us as though he'd merely finished an enjoyable exercise. "Good workout," he said. "Good workout." The crew whispered about him after that. "Unstable," they murmured. But I had watched his eyes during the breach, focused, sharp, alive in a way that unnerved me. This was not madness. This was not recklessness. This was human instinct. Humans do not flee danger. They engage with it, hungry, eager, like predators who feel incomplete without resistance. My unease deepened when I noticed something stranger than his pain tolerance: his compassion. After the breach, when I attempted to scold him for risking his life unnecessarily, Roan knelt so his gaze leveled with mine, a gesture no Varkan warrior would ever dare perform. It was submissive, vulnerable, insultingly gentle. "Good?" he asked me. Me, a towering, armored Deathworlder who could rip bulkheads open with my claws, a creature bred for conquest and survival, a being my entire species considered biologically superior to most galactic life. Yet Roan looked at me as though I were the fragile one, as though I might need comfort. His voice was soft, his expression impossibly kind, and in that moment something inside my chest tightened, a feeling I later realized was a mix of shock and unwanted relief. How could a species be both so violent and so tender, so reckless yet so protective, so fragile-looking yet so unbreakable? Every cycle near Roan added layers to my discomfort. The device weighed more than 3 full Varkan soldiers in combat plating. His fingertips glowed for hours afterward. He barely noticed. And there was the time he shoved me out of the path of a falling support beam, bracing the impact with his own body. He emerged with a broken shoulder. I emerged without words. Humans were contradictions wearing skin. Violent gentleness, reckless compassion, fragile brutality. A paradox that walked upright and smiled through agony. He frightened me not because he attempted to dominate us. He didn't need to. Humans existed in a behavioral category of their own, one evolution had no vocabulary for. The more I watched him, the more one truth became painfully clear. Humans do not survive danger. They confront it, as though daring the universe to try harder. And when Roan's presence aboard our ship became normal, when his laughter filled the halls, when his footsteps rattled the floor panels, when the crew began relying on him even when they refused to admit it, I began to sense a shift. Not in Roan, in the universe around him. As though fate itself bent slightly whenever he decided something. The realization struck me during a quiet moment in the medbay as I analyzed his newest injury. Burns across his palms from gripping a plasma line that should have incinerated him. He watched me with that same amused calm. "You worry too much," he said. "Yes," I whispered, my throat tightening. Roan tilted his head. I closed the scanner. Because the truth had formed fully at last, a truth too heavy to speak aloud. Because you are not like us. Because you are not like anything. Because danger follows you, and you follow danger, and the universe itself seems uncertain how to categorize you. But I didn't say those words. Roan smiled, softly, almost sadly. "Good," he said. I blinked. His expression hardened. Before I could ask what he meant, the ship's alarm blared, and the lights shifted to blood red. Roan stood, scalded hands flexing, his voice suddenly cold. The moment the alarm blared and the ship's interior lights bled into crimson, I knew this threat was different, not because of the data streaming across the tactical displays, but because of Roan. Humans, I had learned, were astonishingly loud creatures. They laughed during injuries, muttered through disasters, cursed creatively during combat drills. Even their breathing felt like a declaration of existence. But Roan went silent. And when a human goes silent, the galaxy itself should consider retreat. He stood at the center of the command deck, shoulders squared, scorched hands curling and uncurling as he stared at the projection of the incoming fleet. His expression, normally carrying some reckless spark, hardened into stone. The Srill Dominion had arrived. I had reviewed the archives on them before, their anatomy, their history, their unusual biology. They were frail things, more suggestion than substance, with limbs that wavered like gas trails and eyes that reflected starlight with unnerving clarity. Low-gravity, low-pressure organisms that had no business surviving in the environments their ships tore into. They should have been prey. They should have been weak. They should have been insignificant. Yet they spread like the cold breath of extinction itself. Their fleets didn't merely conquer. They stripped atmospheres, decompressed cities, turned continents into glittering dust. Their weapons bypassed armor and bone alike, unraveling matter at the molecular level. They flowed through planets like surgical blades, harvesting, always harvesting. But none of that frightened me as much as the human watching them. Roan's jaw clenched as he read the incoming telemetry. "This isn't a scouting party," he murmured. "Consumption." The word cut through me like a thermal lance. "Explain," I demanded, though my throat constricted. Roan didn't look up. "They don't conquer worlds, they harvest them. Living systems, biological networks, neural architectures." I felt my armor plates tighten instinctively. "Store it?" Roan's gaze dropped, shadowed with something that made my gills freeze. Silence washed over the bridge, thick, suffocating, unnatural. I had seen humans face threats that would crush most species. I had watched Roan walk into fire with laughter on his lips. I had seen him hold back collapsing metal with his bare hands, shrugging off injuries that would cripple my strongest warriors. But now he looked cautious. The human who treated death as a temporary inconvenience was cautious. He projected an image onto the holotable, a fractured world, swirling with vapor, cracked open like a broken egg. Filaments of blue-white energy snaked through its surface, twitching like captured ghosts. "This was Velis Prime," Roan said quietly. The projection flickered, shifting to a hollow sphere of crystalline data lattices. My claws scraped the floor. "A consciousness lattice," Rowan confirmed. "Every mind pulled apart, reorganized, cataloged, permanently awake." I recoiled, choking on instinctive dread. Even the Varkin, children of carnage, viewed such a fate as worse than death. Death was a cycle. Death was honorable. But this was erasure wearing the mask of preservation. "And you fought them before," I managed. Rowan nodded once, each movement deliberate. He exhaled slowly, too slowly, carefully. But something in his eyes said more. Barely. Only just. With losses we don't speak of. My species had a word for the kind of silence that followed. Vakora, the quiet before a predator strikes. But this silence was human, and it carried a heavier gravity than any instinct I possessed. "Stalks?" I asked. Rowan's lips tightened. "Nothing that feels emotion in a way we understand can fear them. Fear is a living response. The Srill aren't alive. They just exist." My claws clicked against the console, betraying a tremor I could not suppress. "If even your species fears them, then—" Rowan cut me off sharply. For a heartbeat, I believed him. Then he added, "But we respect what they can do." And to humans, respect was far more damning than fear. The comms officer shrieked suddenly, her frills flaring. Multiple signatures emerging from hypershear. Rowan leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Data streamed across the screen in a lattice of crimson vectors. He swore under his breath. I echoed. His voice dropped into a lethal whisper. The bridge lights flickered as gravitational tides from the Srill ships rippled through space-time. Our hull groaned. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. They consume, Rowan continued, anything that thinks, anything that dreams. My gills quivered. Rowan finally looked at me, really looked, and I felt the weight of a human's full attention settle like a planetary mass. You don't negotiate with a galaxy-sized hunger, he said. You survive it. The ship shuddered violently. The holoscreens fritzed. Alarms screamed. They've locked weapons, the tactical officer rasped. Rowan inhaled, straightened, and his voice, quiet though it was, cut through the chaos with razor focus. All hands, prepare countermeasures. Defensive scatter formation. He turned toward the viewport as shadows gathered outside, living silhouettes of drifting bone and starlight. A pulse of unnatural light washed across the hull. The ship trembled. From beyond the void, a Srill tendril unfurled, reaching for us like death given form. The first Srill weapon discharged, an impossible, silent bloom of light that tore open space itself, and our ship lurched violently as Rowan shouted one last command. Brace! Ashfall orbit was meant to be a bulwark, a line the Srill would break upon, giving the galaxy time to breathe. Instead, it became a graveyard built in real time. The first Srill assault wave tore through our forward carriers in under 2 minutes, their lattice blades slicing through armor forged in the furnaces of Deathworld moons. The shock wave of their opening volley rippled across our formation, shredding shields, rupturing coolant lines, and scattering entire battalions like frightened spawn. We were supposed to be the predators, but in that moment, we were prey. Our command channels filled with panic. Captains screamed contradictory orders. Navigation struggled to orient us through clouds of vaporized metal and drifting corpses. Every instinct told us to flee, or hide, or pray. Commander Rowan did none of those. He surged into action with terrifying precision. His voice cut through the comms, steady, sharp, undeniable. Hold formation, force them into the gravity well. He transformed panic into discipline with nothing more than his tone. And then he went outside. While the battlefield burned, Rowan strapped into a skeletal maintenance frame and launched himself across the hull of our crippled flagship, sparks cascading around him like dying stars. The Srill targeted him directly. Their beams carved glowing trenches inches from his limbs. His suit alarms wailed, his oxygen tank ruptured, frost crept across his visor. He never stopped welding. That was the moment I understood. Humans do not merely endure catastrophes, they weaponize them. The Srill never repeated mistakes. They never hesitated. They observed, learned, and adapted, a trait I had thought unique to sentient predators. After Ashfall orbit, we believed we had seen the full measure of their power. We believed we had survived the edge of impossibility. We believed, perhaps foolishly, that we had begun to understand them. We were wrong. Within the week, the next strike came. It was not chaotic. It was not haphazard. It was a choreography of destruction, fluid, efficient, and utterly remorseless. Each ship, each weapon, each tendril of energy moved in precise calculation. The Srill had anticipated our maneuvers, predicted our escape vectors, exploited every weakness in our formations. And as I observed from the command deck, a sudden sinking realization unfurled inside my chest. Roan was not aboard the flagship. I scanned the hull, the tether stations, the exterior maintenance frames. Nothing. He had vanished. At first, I assumed a survival protocol, some human contingency that I could not yet understand. But as the battle continued, the absence became a presence in itself. The ship felt hollow. Corridors echoed differently. Silence acquired weight, as if each footstep, each blink, each breath carried more consequence. Humans warp the probability around them. Their mere presence recalibrates outcomes, and without one aboard, the universe itself seemed fragile. The crew noticed it before I did. Morale faltered in subtle ways. A glance too long, hands hesitating on controls, voices dropping just below clarity. Humans anchor loyalty in ways that transcend logic. They imbue courage into allies, certainty into hesitation, stubborn hope into despair. Without Roan, we were adrift, unmoored, floating inside a storm we could not yet see. We searched the wreckage, smoke-choked decks, hollowed-out control stations, mangled armor shells drifting in zero-G. Nothing. We traced escape pods. Empty. We scanned the debris fields. Lifeless. Each empty reading struck harder than any weapon the Srill had fired. My armor, my instinct, even my calculated patience trembled. I felt something unexpected, a pang I had never experienced in all my cycles of combat and survival. I missed him. I missed his arrogance that infuriated the most disciplined officers. I missed his stubbornness, his refusal to bow to protocol or expectation. I missed his laughter, reckless and terrible, that mocked danger itself. I missed his optimism, unshakable and blinding, the kind that forced the weak to keep moving, forced the frightened to keep breathing. And worse still, I feared the consequences of his capture. No torture device could bend a human. Their bodies resist, yes, but their minds are instruments of defiance. They do not break. They recalibrate, adapt, and weaponize suffering into insight. And if the Srill ever deciphered the psychology behind Roan's unyielding will, his creative improvisation, his rapid tactical genius, his unpredictable nature, the galaxy would face a force it could neither calculate nor contain. I felt the weight of this possibility crush my chest. Our fleet had become a collection of vessels, obedient and alive, yet without initiative. Without Roan, even the boldest captains hesitated. Orders were issued, but delays grew. Actions were measured, cautious, timid. Fear seeped into protocols. We moved like hatchlings awaiting the guidance of a parent we had lost. And all the while, the Srill adjusted. They learned, they observed, they probed. I walked through the corridors of the flagship, each deck more silent than the last, and I understood something deeply elemental about humans, about Roan. Humans are not merely participants in conflict. They are forces that bend reality itself, and the universe notices when one is absent. The bridge, normally alive with calculation, felt suspended in entropy. Instruments blinked in cold patterns, but the chaos outside no longer seemed containable. Every shadow seemed to deepen unnaturally. Every bulkhead felt thinner than steel should allow. The absence of a human is not absence at all. It is the presence of vulnerability, amplified, magnified, undeniable. I reached for the comm panel, but my claws faltered. I could not summon the words to voice the truth we all understood. The galaxy never feels more exposed, more fragile, more vulnerable than when a human is gone from its rightful place. And in that silence, in the hollow weight of fear, I realized the final terrifying truth. Roan had been taken, and with him our anchor against the impossible. The Srill had learned more in his absence than we had in his presence, and the next move they made would define which species would survive and which would become nothing more than echoes in the void. When the message reached Earth that Commander Elias Roan had been taken, I expected procedure, a careful assessment, calculated responses, diplomatic overtures, protocols followed to the letter of galactic law. That is what every species, every intelligent species I had cataloged, would have done. Humanity did none of these things. They did not negotiate, they did not hesitate, they did not ask for permission. They mobilized. And the speed, scale, and ferocity of that mobilization shattered every assumption I had ever held about them. Entire fleets shifted course in a cascade of stellar movements that ignored borders, jurisdictions, and treaties. Their engines burned blue-white, signatures spiking into ranges forbidden by interstellar law. Systems that had long relied on Varkan supremacy trembled at the sight, and even I, a Varkan of pride and Deathworld-hardened resilience, felt a cold knot of awe tighten in my chest. But it was not the sheer destructive capability that unsettled me most. It was the intent, the emotion behind it. I had studied alien morale, read their behavioral patterns, analyzed war doctrines. Most species fight for resources, survival, ideology. Humans fight for one another. One human taken, one human threatened, and they move with a cohesion and ferocity that defies strategic expectation. I watched transmissions from the front, humans gripping control panels, faces illuminated by starlight, muttering calculations that would have taken entire Varkan teams to produce in the same time. And yet their fingers did not tremble, their eyes did not waver. They executed maneuvers impossible by our understanding of physics, exploiting microgravitational anomalies, bending vectors of energy and matter in ways that were ludicrously precise. Ships collided with incoming Skrill tendrils, weaving through firestorms, ripping apart energy lattices designed to consume entire fleets. And every time one of their vessels fell, another stepped forward, without hesitation, without pause, without fear. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was a promise. The Skrill, who had consumed entire star systems without hesitation, suddenly faltered. The rhythm of their attack, once perfect and unavoidable, broke at the edges. Their formations wavered, their precise strikes delayed by milliseconds, enough to allow human ships to penetrate their outer lines, dismantling harvesting tendrils and severing energy conduits. I began to understand something elemental about humanity. Loyalty is a weapon, and humans wield it without concern for convention. Their fury is not ideological, it is personal, singular, absolute, terrifyingly efficient. They are not moved by morality, law, or expectation. They are moved by one of their own. Across Ashfall orbit and surrounding systems, the tide began to shift. Human-led squadrons, flying under colors unregistered by any council, executed flanking maneuvers, blitzing forward with speeds forbidden by physics, deploying pulse shields that deflected matter and energy in ways we had thought impossible. Every strike was coordinated, yet improvisational, each ship acting independently but as part of an organism guided by instinct honed over millennia. The Skrill paused. For a moment, their infinite patience, their perfect calculation faltered. Their beams, once unerring, misaligned. Their ships hesitated at microseconds of movement they could not calculate, waiting for the next variable they had not yet encountered. And it was then that I realized it was the human presence, even absent from the battlefield, that bent probability itself. Humans do not merely survive the impossible, they force the impossible to bend around them. The fleet's movements became poetry in motion, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by rage, loyalty, and precision that could not be anticipated by any non-human intelligence. Every Skrill ship that survived an encounter carried new trauma, new uncertainty. By the time the first human reinforcements reached the captured Commander Roan, the Skrill had already begun to reconsider their strategy. I observed Roan's extraction. Even shackled and confined within the Skrill vessel, his posture did not break. His eyes scanned, calculating, defiant. And yet, the moment he saw the approaching human fleet, a faint smile curved his scorched, bruised lips. He understood what I had begun to comprehend. Humans do not start wars lightly. They do not act without purpose. They respect logic and caution. But when forced, when provoked, when one of their own is threatened, they unleash a force that even the most patient, calculating enemies cannot withstand. The Skrill retreated, temporarily repelled, not by overwhelming firepower, but by the certainty of human resolve. They had encountered humans before, but never so personally threatened, never so intimately challenged. I realized in that moment why civilizations feared humanity even before they arrived. Not for conquest, not for ideology, not even for their biology, but for the terrifying simplicity of their loyalty. One human threatened, one human captured, and the universe itself must reckon with the wrath of the species. And the galaxy, every system, every fleet, every being would never feel more vulnerable than when facing humans compelled to act for one of their own. We expected wreckage. When the human-led fleets finally breached the Srill flagship, our sensors recorded violent ruptures across the ship's hull, cascading energy detonations and flares that could have incinerated a dozen worlds. Every intelligence module on board predicted debris, floating fragments, wreckage of systems designed to imprison consciousness itself. Nothing had prepared us for what emerged from the chaos. A figure. A single figure, striding across open vacuum. Suit scorched, helmet cracked, oxygen lines severed, yet movement deliberate. His mag harness kept him tethered to nothing, yet he propelled forward as though gravity were a suggestion and exhaustion an abstract concept. Commander Elias Roan, alive. Of course, how could it have been anything else? I had spent cycles observing humans, and I knew this truth. Nothing, not fire, not vacuum, not atomic annihilation, could truly stop them. I watched, unable to breathe properly under the constriction of awe. His armor was half destroyed, suit panels flaring where plasma had grazed, yet he advanced with terrifying purpose. Clutched in his hands was a Srill core node, a lattice of energy and consciousness, pulsing faintly with the stolen minds of countless systems. A device meant to enslave the sentient, to render civilizations inert. And he had destroyed it. The node warped and shattered under his touch, circuits bending, energy collapsing into a harmless glow. The minds contained within flickered, then shimmered free in spectral displays across the void, returning to reality. Ships across the fleet registered the phenomenon, some even trembling, as if recognizing a power beyond calculation. Roan maneuvered back toward our flagship with methodical calm. Sensors detected incoming Srill countermeasures, beams designed to vaporize him mid-transit. Each strike he dodged with effortless fluidity, spinning, vaulting, and pulling along tether lines as if gravity were play. Sparks from his suit ignited in bursts around him, yet he never faltered. When he was finally pulled aboard, the bridge erupted. Cheers thundered, alarms became celebration, tears welled, and even the most disciplined Varkan warriors froze in stunned silence. We had trained for centuries to survive Deathworld extremes, and yet here was a human walking back from annihilation itself. Roan said nothing at first. He collapsed against the deck, half frozen, half burned, chest rising and falling in rapid, uneven bursts. A laugh escaped, breathless and ragged. "Missed you too," he murmured, as though the entire fleet, the chaos, the galaxy's fate were secondary to this simple reunion. And then I observed something truly unprecedented. The Skrull fleet, the entity that had consumed worlds without hesitation, that had enslaved consciousness across star systems, halted. They did not retreat from firepower. They did not falter at tactical strikes. They recoiled. They faltered. They retreated from him. For the first time, I understood the hierarchy of terror in the galaxy. Apex predators exist, yes, calculated, merciless, efficient, unstoppable forces of evolution. The Varkan understood this intimately. But above them, above even the Skrull, there was a force beyond calculation, beyond prediction. A human. Roan had become more than a commander, more than a legend, more than a weapon. He was an idea, an organism that rendered even the deadliest species uncertain, unsteady, and ultimately cautious. We gathered around him, expecting guidance, orders, even strategy. Instead, he looked at each of us with that impossibly human combination of exhaustion and feral joy. A smile curved through soot and blood and burned fabric. He surveyed the deck, the fleet, the debris, the liberated consciousnesses, and finally, with a tone almost casual, said, "All right." Every Varkan aboard felt the weight of the moment. Not just survival, not just victory, something older, deeper, primal. The understanding that evolution, terror, and intelligence can bend in ways none of us had imagined. That a human, this one human, could stand atop even the apex predator and make it pause. It was not brute force, it was will, it was defiance, it was incomprehensible. And I, a Varkan scientist, chronicler, and warrior, realized something fundamental. In the galaxy's hierarchy, in the shadow of unimaginable predators and impossibly precise intelligence, there existed a being whose presence rewrote the rules of survival. Roan did not just survive. He redefined what survival meant. He reshaped fear. He became the apex. And in the silent awe that followed, every species, every observer, every fleet, every intelligence would remember this day. The day an apex predator learned to fear something higher, a human. The final confrontation did not erupt with the cacophony I had expected. There was no battle in the traditional sense. No screaming engines, no cascading explosions, no endless waves of ships reduced to fire. It was a correction, an inevitability written across the cosmos the moment humans had arrived. The Skrill, for all their adaptive genius, their merciless intelligence, and their centuries of conquest, fought like creatures sensing the end was already decided. Their attacks were precise, their coordination near perfect, yet there was a rhythm I had never witnessed, the rhythm of desperation. They tried to match humanity's ingenuity, but every measure they devised was countered, every maneuver anticipated, every pattern disrupted. The humans moved as one, not mindless machines, not thoughtless warriors, but a force guided by will. Commander Roan commanded like the axis of a storm, orchestrating fleets, predicting strategies, reading opponents in ways that should have been impossible. And still, the most astonishing aspect was not the sheer destructive power at their disposal. It was their restraint. They could have annihilated the Skrill entirely, erased them from the galaxy in hours. But they did not. Instead, humans offered terms, harsh, non-negotiable, absolute. And when the Skrill hesitated, the message was clear: compliance or exposure. There was no negotiation in the sense of compromise. There was only order. And the Skrill finally recognized a force greater than their own adaptability, a will that did not require survival as its motivation, only purpose. For the first time, I saw an enemy bow without being broken, not because it had no power left, but because it understood it faced something it could not hope to dominate. The war ended, not with extinction, but with acknowledgement. The humans had demonstrated that the universe itself could bend, not through destruction alone, but through control of will and timing. On the observation deck of our flagship, the stars spread before us, unbroken, quiet. Roan leaned against the railing beside me, his suit scorched, his face tired but unbowed. He glanced at me, that familiar mischievous grin lighting his bruised features. "Lars?" he asked. I laughed, a sound I had not realized I still carried in my chest. Because finally, I understood. Humans are not Deathworlders by accident. They are Deathworlders by choice. And it is that choice, deliberate, conscious, unrelenting, that makes them terrifying. And extraordinary. The galaxy had been corrected, balance restored, not by force alone, but by a species that could fight without ceasing and, astonishingly, could choose to stop. And as I watched Roan survey the stars, I knew this truth would echo for cycles to come. The apex is not merely strength, nor cunning, nor resilience. The apex is choice. Humans choose. And that is the ultimate power.